Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. What if the spark that ignites a revolution isn't just a single event, but rather the culmination of years, even decades of deep-seated frustrations, just, waiting for a match? And what if the story we hear first isn't the full picture, but maybe just the opening scene to a much larger, more complex trauma? Today, we're exploring the recent upheaval in Nepal. Huge public demonstrations, and ultimately the prime minister resigned. Now, initial reports painted a pretty clear picture. A social media ban triggered it all, and the government quickly crumbled. But as we often find, the reality on the ground is usually far more intricate than the headlines suggest.
Indeed, and while that image of people power bringing down a government is, well, undeniably compelling.
It is, yeah.
The true story often involves this rich tapestry of deep-rooted grievances, subtle constitutional nuances, and a path forward that's just rarely straightforward. We'll definitely look into that core narrative, the social media ban, as the trigger. But our mission today is really to critically examine how it was first framed, maybe challenge some assumptions made in those initial breaking reports, and shed light on critical factors that might have been, underplayed or overlooked at first. It's a fascinating unfolding case study. Yeah. Really shows how quickly events can accelerate and why it's so vital to look beyond the surface.
Absolutely. So let's start with what looked like the flashpoint. You probably remember the news back on September 4th. Nepal's government basically told the internet service providers, the ISPs, to block 26 social platforms.
That's 26, yeah.
And not obscure ones either. We're talking the majors: Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, YouTube, X. The list goes on. The official reason given was that these companies hadn't registered with the authorities, part of some new regulations. Now, this sweeping digital blackout, it immediately felt draconian to a lot of people, especially when you think about Nepal's incredibly young population. Median age is just 25.
Very young.
For a generation practically living online, this was a direct hit on their daily lives. And we saw the result. Huge nationwide unrest, so intense the government reversed the ban within days.
Yeah, they did. But while that social media ban was definitely the spark, the thing that lit the fuse right then, it really landed on tinder that had been piling up for a very, very long time. Newer reports coming out of Kathmandu make it crystal clear that much deeper systemic grievances were fueling this. We're talking widespread youth unemployment, this pervasive, deeply resented feeling of elite privilege, and just endemic corruption that's been festering for ages, really eroding public trust. And a really powerful example of this anger bubbling up was the #NepoKids meme.
I saw that mentioned.
Yeah, the sort of sardonic hashtag. It was going around even before the ban. It basically poked fun at the often globe-trotting kids of politicians, flaunting these lavish lifestyles, while ordinary Nepalis, especially young people, were really struggling economically. It wasn't just a joke, it was a potent symbol. It turned that abstract anger about corruption and privilege into something tangible, personal, something that really resonated with a frustrated population.
That really puts the intensity of the reaction into context. So with that frustration simmering, things just escalated incredibly fast. We saw the initial protests explode. Tragically, there were deaths, young people caught in clashes near the parliament building.
Oh, very tragic.
Then, as you said, the social media ban was reversed. Seemed like a concession, but it didn't stop things. And then, September 9th, Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli resigned.
After barely a year back in office, his fourth time around.
Exactly. It really highlights Nepal's ongoing political instability. Now, initial reports, including for The Economist, mentioned around 19 deaths. But I gather even that number needs a bit of caution.
It absolutely does. In these fast-moving situations, casualty figures are almost always provisional. It's so important to treat them that way. While 19 deaths was widely reported initially, those estimates climbed pretty quickly to maybe 25, 30. As hospitals got updated records, more information surfaced. It's not necessarily bad reporting, it just shows the chaos and the difficulty of getting accurate counts in real time.
Right, the fog of the situation.
Exactly. It highlights the challenge for everyone, journalists, authorities, but the sequence is consistent. The clashes, the ban reversal, the PM resigning, all in days. It really underscores a point for us, as listeners trying to stay informed. You need that sort of numbers discipline, always ready for initial figures to be revised.
And as things were spiraling, the Army's role came into focus. The Economist reported the Army would take responsibility for maintaining order. That sounds quite strong, almost like martial law was imminent. Is that the full picture, or is there more nuance there?
That's a vital question, especially when security forces get involved. We need to be really careful with the constitutional nuance here. The army's on the streets, yes. They're enforcing curfews in Kathmandu. And this does line up with public statements from the military about restoring order.
Okay.
However, and this is a critical distinction, the army has not announced rule by decree.
What's the difference exactly?
Rule by decree would mean they've essentially bypassed parliament, taken over executive power to govern unilaterally. That hasn't happened. What we need to watch very closely is whether these emergency powers, the curfews, the troop presence, stay temporary and focus just on restoring order.
Right.
Or if they start to harden, maybe begin to encroach on the civilian political process itself. You see, this idea of the army as guarantor, it really cuts both ways.
How so?
Well, deployment might stabilize the streets short term, sure.
Yeah.
But prolonged curfews, preemptive arrests, expanding emergency rules, that could completely undermine the civil liberties the protests were partly about.
I see. So it's a fine line between stabilizing and taking over.
Precisely. That tension is what we need to keep an eye on.
So the PM's out, the army's visible. Naturally, the question becomes, who governs next? We've heard some interesting names floated for a potential caretaker government. People like former Chief Justice Sushila Karki, apparently proposed by protest groups, and the Kathmandu mayor, Balendra Shah, known as Balin. They're seen as outsiders, maybe a break from the usual politics.
Right, representing a fresh start.
But I imagine this opens up a whole new can of worms, constitutionally and politically.
It certainly does. And here's where we hit a really critical point, one often missed in those first reports. Nepal's 2015 constitution, the current one, it actually doesn't provide for a non-parliamentary neutral authority. Not in the way you might think, like a technocratic caretaker government.
Really? So what does it say?
Article 76 specifically lays out a parliamentary path. It says you either find a new prime minister who can command a majority within the existing parliament,
Okay.
or, if that fails, you dissolve parliament and hold fresh elections.
So no room for an outsider picked by protesters.
Not directly within the Constitution, no. It means these popular ideas, bringing in someone like Karki or Balin Shah, who definitely appeal to a public sick of the old guard, would technically be extra-constitutional. Unless, somehow, all the major political parties agreed to some very specific, very complex workaround.
Which sounds unlikely.
Potentially very difficult. It immediately raises big questions about legitimacy, stability. The PM resigning is one step, but it doesn't guarantee a smooth, constitutionally sound transition. That tension, public demand versus the legal framework, is huge.
That's a crucial distinction. Definitely adds complexity. Now, the Economist article also drew parallels to other places in the region, like the revolts in Bangladesh recently and Sri Lanka back in 2022. Is that a fair comparison? What can those situations tell us?
Well, the regional analogies are fair in the sense of, yes, popular discontent boiling over due to similar issues, economic hardship, corruption, frustration.
Right.
But if you look at how these movements actually translate into governance, the organizational structure can be quite different. Bangladesh, for instance, was fairly centralized, right? Largely student-led, and crucially, it managed to produce an acknowledged interim authority.
Okay, there was a clear body to negotiate with.
Exactly. Nepal's protests, at least so far, seem much more decentralized, maybe more leader-light.
Does that matter?
It could, yeah. While that grassroots energy is powerful, it can make bargaining and forming a coherent government structure much harder later on. Without clear leaders or maybe a unified set of demands, the transition risks getting fragmented, maybe dragging out the instability even after the PM is gone.
And inevitably, when there's turmoil like this, you wonder about the big neighbors. The article hinted at India and China watching closely. What have we seen from them? How might their interests play in?
It's interesting, the early signals from both New Delhi and Beijing have actually been quite cautious, publicly anyway. We've mostly seen calls for restraint, not overt interference or obvious attempts to leverage the situation right away.
So, no immediate power plays.
Doesn't seem like it yet. India put out advisories, urged dialogue, peaceful resolution. China voiced hope for order and stability. It suggests maybe a desire to avoid turning this instantly into an India-China tug-of-war, which has been a background worry in Nepal for years.
Okay.
They're definitely watching, of course. Nepal's strategic location matters. But the initial public stance seems to be prioritizing stability over jumping in too hard. Any shift from that would be significant, though.
Another really critical angle the article raised was the economic one. How vital social media is for Nepal is connecting with family and friends working abroad. And remittances, money sent home, make up over a quarter of the country's GDP. That's huge.
It's absolutely massive. And this brings us to a really crucial point. the unusual economic importance of this digital blackout. I think this really explains the sheer depth of the public anger. Nepal is one of the world's most remittance-dependent countries. So think about it. For countless families, that day-to-day contact via WhatsApp, Facebook, whatever.
It's not just chatting.
Exactly. It's not just social. It's often the direct financial lifeline. It's how money transfer details get sent, how families coordinate support, how a huge chunk of the informal economy works.
Wow.
So when the government pulled the plug on those platforms, it wasn't just an inconvenience or even just an attack on free speech in the abstract. It felt existential.
It hit their wallets, their survival.
Directly, it hit the core of economic survival for so many, triggering a much more visceral, widespread anger than maybe a similar ban would elsewhere.
Okay, so we've looked at the spark, the deep frustrations, the PM's exit. But like you said, resignation is in transition. What does Act 2 look like now, especially with that tricky constitution and all the other players involved?
You're right. Resignation definitely doesn't equal transition. This is where the hard part and maybe more instability begins. The Constitution basically offers a few paths now. Path 1, the ideal perhaps. A new majority PM emerges from inside the current parliament following Article 76.
The parliamentary route.
Correct. Path 2, that fails, parliament gets dissolved, snap elections are called. Path 3, and this is the precarious one, things veer into some kind of negotiated extra-constitutional interim setup.
The one without clear rules.
Precisely. And while that might seem appealing short-term to break the deadlock, it carries real risks for Nepal's democracy down the line. It could undermine the whole constitutional framework. That tension, which path will it be, often gets lost when we just focus on the PM quitting.
And back to the army for a moment. The presence seems stabilizing initially, but you warned it cuts both ways. How do we tell the difference between genuine stabilization and something more worrying?
It's a critical question anytime the military steps onto the streets during political unrest. Yes, troops might calm things down immediately, but you have to watch the duration and the scope. Are the curfews temporary? Are arrests targeted or widespread and preemptive? Are emergency powers expanding? If military statements stay focused on coordination, time limits, supporting civilian efforts, that points towards stabilization. But if they start making political pronouncements, filling the power vacuum, imposing broader restrictions indefinitely, then you worry they're shifting from enforcing order to shaping it. That's the danger zone.
There's also this undercurrent about royalists. They've been campaigning to bring back the monarchy, which ended back in 2008. Could this chaos actually help them, give them an opening?
Well, it's true there's been visible monarchist activity, especially recently, but it's really important to clarify. The coalition on the streets today seems much broader than just that. The main drivers right now appear to be anti-corruption, anti-impunity, economic frustration, not primarily a call to restore the king.
So it's not a royalist uprising in disguise?
I don't think so. To frame it that way risks a category error. The core demands are about good governance, accountability, opportunity now. Now, could royalists try to capitalize on the instability? Sure. But they don't seem to be the main engine behind this particular wave of anger. So looking ahead, what should we be watching for specifically? A few key things. First, does the president actually trigger that Article 76 process quickly this week? You know, the formal steps to find a PM in Parliament. A fast parliamentary track lowers the odds of some ad hoc outside arrangement.
Okay, watch the constitutional clock.
Exactly. Second, how complete is the social media rollback? Was the order fully canceled in law or just paused? If it's not legally fixed, that threat could easily come back.
The digital lifeline issue again.
Right. Third, accountability for the killings. Credible investigations, clear orders for police restraint. These are crucial de-escalators right now. Vital for rebuilding any trust. And finally, who actually speaks for the street? If figures like Karki or Shaw become real negotiating points, maybe talks can coalesce. But if the movement stays fragmented, leaderless, that could unfortunately just prolong the turmoil. And maybe a final thought for you listening. In this world of incredibly fast-moving news, where the first headlines grab us, it's just so crucial to try and look beyond them, to consider those deeper constitutional gears grinding, the long history of grievances, the subtle power shifts happening beneath the surface. These are the things that truly shape a nation's future. Maybe ask yourself, what assumptions might you be making about other global events you're following? And what might be the unseen forces, that deep tinder at play there too?
Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs. And don't forget to like, comment, and share.